Hi, Dennis. I'm really excited for another podcast.
Yeah. What is this? Is this the 12th episode? Am I counting correctly?
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
Great.
it's official. It's a thing now.
It is.
Yeah, but I'm excited that over the last few weeks we've had more and more listeners. We've been getting more and more pings from folks, and we're kind of honing in on what it is folks are really finding beneficial in these conversations that we're having. And so I'm really excited
Yep.
today to take a lot of that feedback that we've gotten and really put it into practice, talk about something super specific, super
Yep.
tactical and actionable. So hopefully everyone listening has something they can actually put in their tool belt straight out the gate after listening to this episode. But
Yeah.
today we want to talk about how to handle tough interview questions. It's
Mm.
something that comes up all the time. I've lived it. I'm sure you've lived it.
Yep. Yep.
Pretty much everybody I've talked to has some sort of angst or worry about the inevitable tough question that gets thrown at you. And so
Yep.
we thought we'd spend some time today kind of breaking down some strategies that we find work pretty much in all cases, not just in tough interview situations, but also just in generally awkward work conversations.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. For
it's
sure.
it's kind of multi-purpose advice, which I'm
Yep.
excited about and I think will be really beneficial for everyone listening. But um,
Awesome.
yeah, I'd love to just sort of dive right in and get started.
Yeah. Yeah. What is a good example of a tough interview question that we could anchor folks around?
Oh my gosh, there's 10 million that I can think of. There's the ones that seem to come up a lot lately are the ones where it feels like the interviewer is fishing for
Yeah.
data on a
Yep.
former organization. So whether it's someone that you worked with or the overall culture, or if you're interviewing with a competitor, if they're looking for
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
little tidbits about your
Yeah.
company or your former company's roadmap or whatever it may be, those always
Yep.
leave a little bit of ick for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't love those.
Yeah.
Um, there's a bunch. I think folks have a tough time figuring out how to navigate conversations or interview questions relating to if they were laid off,
I think that's a good one. Yep.
or if they
Yeah.
were let go for any reason. I think that that can be tricky. What about
Yeah.
you? What do you think?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of folks just kind of hit on, I'm having a tough time talking about, or I get a lot of questions about the you know, multiple roles and jobs over the last 3 to 4 years that I've had, which I think is just an interesting interview question in general. To me, it feels a little bit, like out of like, where have you been, to be questioning somebody's especially in tech, right? There's been a lot of movement there. So
Totally.
that's a tough one that people have like, I don't know how to explain that, which is kind of unfortunate that they have to explain it. I think we're living it. So that's one that I hear a lot. So
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really they're all over the map. There's a ton of different varieties, but again, and there's no silver bullet answer. I think that's a really important caveat to kind of start
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
conversation is
Yeah.
because every person's situation is different.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
as a society, we've gotten pretty good about sniffing out the BS on things that feel
Hmm.
overly scripted, things that feel borrowed from elsewhere.
Hmm.
We want to avoid that, right? We want your answers to tough interview questions or just tough conversations in general to feel authentic, but
Yes.
also leave whoever you're talking to with the sense of confidence that you're not going to be pushed around, you know?
Hmm. Yeah.
Like,
I think, yeah, I think that's the best way to think about it, right? We aren't, you don't have to come to these with like, even like a really good, solid scripted answer, be you and have like answer the question, but know that, we're humans here. We're having conversations, right? And yeah, so let's hop into some of the things that people can kind of think
yeah,
about here. I think I'm excited for these takeaways. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, so advice number one that I always share with folks, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is when I ask folks to tell me how they think they want to respond to a hard interview question or something that might get asked during an interview, the huge majority of the time, folks tend to overshare. It's just
Mm,
something we do as humans, right? We
mhm.
feel the need to like talk our way through something
Yeah,
kind of,
yeah,
and it it can get a little like word vomity.
yeah,
Nobody's
yeah.
doing anything wrong when they do this. It's a skill to
Mhm.
keep things tight, keep things concise, and then just like stop talking when the question
Yeah,
has been
yeah,
answered.
yeah, yeah.
So I
I think
think that's,
nerves
yeah,
has a I think nerves has a lot to do with that, right? You're like, you're anticipating this question, you rehearse this question over and over and over. Now's your, and then all of a sudden you're off script. And you're like, oh, where am I going? Yeah, I
totally.
think that's a good one. Like knowing when to just kind of you answer the question.
Yeah, totally. And I think the easiest way to ground yourself in that or create a framework for yourself is to share directional truths about a situation, but
Mhm,
avoid specific details. And
mhm,
there's a couple of reasons that I suggest that. First and foremost, like you always want a directional truth because you never want to blatantly not tell the truth. We've seen
mhm,
it,
mhm,
we've seen stories on LinkedIn of hiring managers or recruiters who do a background check or do a
mhm.
reference, whatever, and come to find out some story that they've gotten from a candidate is totally
Yeah,
fabricated.
yeah,
And
yeah.
on one hand, I can understand, if someone's been in the job search for a really long time and they're exhausted and exacerbated and they're just really looking for a break, I can see a world where they want to stretch a little bit, just
Mhm,
close
mhm,
the deal and land the gig. I get it.
mhm, mhm.
But the second that stretching starts to get so far as to that's just not what happened,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
never a good look and it never pays off in the long run. So
yeah,
don't we always start with the directional truth.
yeah,
It's an important
yeah,
one there.
yeah. I think it's easy, like you said, to get caught up.
Hmm.
If you're working on a project and you want to claim complete ownership over that project, or you led a small team, but all of a sudden that team became this massive thing in your, but like, it's okay. Like you said, share directional truths. Like, yeah, like I was a part of this project that, this is what I did, that contributed to X, but acknowledging, the team that was involved in it, or how you, maybe managed on a project versus a whole team, like how you frame it, I think is very important, right? So yes, yes, I would say that's a great one to start with.
Yeah.
Kind of a
And
101.
yeah, and I think the other side of that coin of sharing directional truths. So let's say, as an example, someone was let go from their company because it wasn't a fit for whatever reason. The directional truth could be as simple as that. My former organization, I had a conversation, realized that this wasn't exactly the right fit for the work that needed to be done. So we decided to
Yep.
go our separate ways. Like that's
Yep.
totally fair. And
Yes.
someone interviewing you or on the other end of that conversation can read between the lines often and understand, okay, it wasn't a fit. Exactly whose decision it was is kind of
Is it?
irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. Like
Yeah.
this idea of just naming the thing, or like just having that, like no one's expecting like perfection, right? I think when, like, oh my God, I I think you're spot on. Things are gonna work out at your current and your former player if you're currently there. Things are not, and we're all humans in this conversation. I think that, people can kind of relate. They're gonna either A, it's gonna give them the opportunity to ask more questions about how you could fit into their culture, and like really start a dialogue here around what did work, what didn't work. Like, and that's kind of what you want, right? You want to have a conversation, not an interrogation on both sides of this. So love
100%.
that. Love that.
Yeah. I think the last point I'll make on this shared directional truths piece is the other side of that coin is be really mindful to not overshare specific details. To the comment I made a few minutes ago around annoying questions where it's very clear that the person on the other end is trying to fish for data,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's just not a good look.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like don't
Yeah.
feed the
Yeah.
beast in that moment. You have
Mm-hmm.
very, very little to gain, if anything at all,
Yeah.
by bad mouthing or putting down your former
Mm-hmm.
organization, you
Mm-hmm.
know, or any individuals who are there. You
Yeah.
can absolutely talk about some of that stuff in a forward-looking way. So let's say, as an
Mm-hmm.
example, you left a toxic culture, and yeah, maybe there were some ringleaders of that toxic culture, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to name them, but you can say something to the effect of, look, I learned a ton at my last gig. A lot of it, relating to my job and my work and my specialty, and also a lot of things related to how I like to work and where the type
Mm-hmm.
of environment where
Mm-hmm.
I'm most successful. I've learned and realized for myself that I really need things A, B, and C. And that could be, high trust environments, diverse teams, pick your things that
Yeah.
you want to claim as most important to you. Those things are really important to me, and I need those in my work. And that's why I'm excited to
Mm-hmm.
be having this
Mm-hmm.
conversation with you today about potentially taking on this new role with your team.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a name the thing. Like they can do the
Mm-hmm.
backwards math and say, oh,
Exactly.
Shelby might have left a toxic culture.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. I'm
Yeah.
not, because there's
Yeah.
nothing to gain by doing so.
Yeah. Nothing at all. Yeah.
At
And
least
in
not,
fact, that,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, you're gonna, and again, they're interviewing you, so they're gonna see that and say, okay, that's the type of person this person may be, is gonna fuel that. You really want to just, the way you describe that and the way you answer that is spot on. They can do the work to figure out what you mean and how and honestly, again, look at those questions. Is there a motive, and kind of like navigate through that? But yeah, no need to burn the bridge. No need to kind of give them a bad taste about kind of how you may want to,
mhm,
what kind of culture you're getting, because again, they're bringing you into their culture, and everyone comes with some sort of history, so they're gonna, and they're doing their work. They're gonna do their work after that interview as well. So
totally.
cool.
Well, I think that's a really good bridge actually to this second piece of advice that we like to give for tough interview questions. And that's really remember that interviews are two-way streets. I think in today's
Mhm.
market, a lot of folks can forget that they are also interviewing the
Yeah,
company.
yeah.
People are really looking to land their next gig, which I 1,000,000% understand. But how you're treated in an interview is incredibly telling, right? And when a company
Hmm.
shows you how they work and how they operate and how they treat people, you got to
Hmm.
believe them. So
Hmm.
another way to say that is, tough questions are allowed. You should expect to get tough questions here and there.
Hmm.
That's part of
Hmm.
the process. And I'm not
Hmm.
shying away from that or suggesting that any company should not ask tough questions.
Yeah,
They
for
absolutely
sure.
should.
Yeah.
However, you can ask tough questions and
Hmm.
be respectful and
Yeah.
be kind and understanding and not turn it into, I mean, I've heard horror stories in the last few months of people just feeling like they're just getting berated
Yeah.
by these folks
Yeah.
interviewing. And it's my advice to them always, they'll call me after and they'll say, I feel like I bombed that. What should I do? And my
Hmm.
response is always, you didn't bomb anything. You just got the
Yeah.
clarity that you needed, that is not a
That's
place where
exactly
you
it.
want to
Yeah.
work. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a no-go.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, if they're treating people that don't even work at the company that way, it's
Yeah.
wild to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah, like you said, best way is to get to a no quick. They just gave you that. Like, nope, not gonna work out. And
Yeah.
that's that mindset though, right? Of, what do you need going into this? Like, no, doing your, let's go back to the framework, right? Know who you are, know your, like, and really like get clear on that. And it's not to get too tangent here, but it's like buying a house, right? It's like you can't get everything in that one home, right? But you're gonna have your like give and takes, right? But you're also gonna do your work, right? And I think you're gonna ask the questions and you should ask the questions if they start, to like really understand like what's the culture, do the work. Like, we'll talk about this here in a little bit, but you know, you're here to interview them just as much as they're here. I mean, jointly, you've created this space to have a conversation, and take advantage of that. If you're just sitting there with no questions, they don't like that either, right? Like they're gonna they want to be pushed back. They want you to ask these questions too. So because they're thinking about it, right? I've been in, worked with teams where, we just had a crazy layoff and like companies are having, it's no secret, right? So ask about that, like don't like they're kind of expecting those questions to come back at them too. So if you don't ask about it, it's almost kind of like, what? Are you just
Yeah.
looking for a job, or do you really want to kind of be a part of what we're doing here? So yeah, I'm all
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there is that tone and kind of cultural vibe piece of interviews being
Hmm.
two-way streets. The
Hmm.
expectations, to your point, I think it adds a lot to your
Hmm.
I don't know what the right word is, but I think interviewers appreciate feeling
Yeah.
like someone has done the
It,
work, and for
yeah,
sure.
it's like a maturity, right? Like you get to a point when you interview, like you want them to see you as one, like a highly skilled individual,
Mhm.
right? Um, and at a certain point in your career, you're kind of expected, right, to ask more questions and just kind of sit there and answer questions, right? You're expected to come to the table with
Yeah.
a certain presence,
Yeah.
depending on the role you're obviously looking for too. I mean, we don't have to get into that because that's very complicated, but
Yeah, I think maybe a slight it's like a Venn diagram. It's not a completely
mhm,
separate thing than what you just said, but it's a little bit different. Is less about the expectation of you coming to an interview with a bunch of
mhm,
questions prepared or whatever, but more around how can you proactively get ahead of all the things that are potentially in front of you, right? If we look at
yeah,
the last,
mhm,
few years out in the wild,
mhm.
it's crazy. I go on to LinkedIn right now, I read job descriptions, and job descriptions are garbage these days. They
Yeah, it's a
all
mess. It's a
basically
mess.
just
It's a
say,
mess.
we're looking for a rock star who thrives in ambiguity and can get shit done. Like
It does all the things.
all the things
Yeah.
all the time. And it's with a smile on their face. Like
Yeah.
that's so not
Yeah.
helpful. But what that tells
Yeah.
us is that these companies
Mhm.
oftentimes don't exactly know what they're looking for. They are a
Mhm.
little bit throwing
Mhm.
spaghetti at the wall. And so, who's going to be able to assess more quickly whether or not you're the right person for a role?
Yep.
You
Yep.
are, not the
Yes.
company.
Yes.
So, when you think
Yeah.
about an interview being a two-way street, you need to think about that as free insurance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What questions can you ask? How can you really suss out what is this job and am I the right person to do this job?
Mhm. Mhm. Yep.
So that you can opt in or out. You're not
Yes.
left at the whim of their ability to assess whether or not you're the right thing.
That's exactly it. That's exactly
It's
the
too
first that yeah.
risky.
Yeah. Yeah. You should be like in that frame of mind of being in control in that, right? Versus yeah, yeah. Well stated. Nothing else to add to that. I think it's spot on advice.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot, but it's hard. This is actually a really good pivot to the third point that we want to make
Yeah.
today is
Yep.
having that confidence to go into an interview and know all the questions you want to ask and really kind of take charge and not overpower that conversation, but make that a two-way street, a true
Hmm.
interaction. That takes confidence and that
Hmm.
is not born out of nothing. We don't all wake
Correct.
up and
Correct.
say,
Yeah.
oh, we're just gonna, that's stressful. It can be hard and
Hmm.
intimidating.
Yeah.
So I think this third point that is really important and cannot be overstated is this idea that prep and practice are
Yeah.
essential.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
to the point that I would almost tag it not just essential, like it's a non-negotiable. That's
Yeah.
how important it is, I think.
Yeah. Just showing up, like, okay, I've got my boilerplate, responses to all these questions that I think about, and just assuming that every interview is going to go the same. Every company is like, it's not a place you want to be when you walk into that, turn on that Zoom, and then now you're caught off guard with there's so much different and you're not prepared. It goes bad real quick.
Mhm.
You have to do the work, right? And that's a part of why companies will invest in, things like, talent brand, right? Like those are things that are out there to help you do the research and opt in or opt out, like to your point earlier, on if this is where you want to be. And let's say you opt in, you're like, okay, yeah, I did it. I'm curious, but then you go to the next level. Okay, like I see what they're telling me,
Mhm.
that feels right, but now you go deeper, right? And that's where, I think, you know, I've had many people ask me or ping me directly when I worked for companies like, hey, tell me a little bit about, I'm looking for this particular role. Um, can you tell me more about it? And I'm more than happy, as a current employee to like help someone. Yeah, this is where we're at. Or former, like I've had people ask me, like, I saw you worked here. Um, because, and again, I'm not bad mathing. I'm just like, this was my vantage point, but
Mhm.
doing that research is going to allow you to build those questions to have a really good two-way conversation,
Mhm.
um, that you need, right? So that you can make the best decision in this moment, and, keeps you kind of driving that narrative. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah,
Totally.
yeah.
I think the other important thing around prep and practice is around what I'll call depressurizing the
Mm,
situation, right? The anticipation of a hard question, especially if, you don't generally love interviews in the first place, or if they make you nervous for, a variety of reasons, all of which are valid.
mm,
The thought and the anticipation of, oh
yeah,
gosh, the hard questions might come, right?
yeah.
For many of us, our default behavior is to avoid, like, oh, I don't
Mhm,
want to do the hard thing more than I have to do the hard thing. So
yeah.
why would I, in my off time, proactively
Mm,
think about these hard questions or practice
yeah.
answering these hard questions? Like, it's not in our bones to do that, right?
Mm,
But
yeah.
in reality, we are far better equipped to handle those hard
Yes.
questions and those difficult topics when we've when we've kind of taken away their power. And we take away
Yeah.
their power by talking about them ahead of time
Yeah.
and sitting with them and naming them and knowing that they might come, and
Yeah.
they kind of lose their interest in a funny
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
uh,
They just, yeah. Yeah. No, I immediately go, Shelby, to like just the old cliches, in sports, right? Like the game isn't won on a Sunday usually, right? The games are won during the week. They practice these, what happens if we're in this situation and we're losing we're down by this. And, I mean, that's the work they do during the week. Or when that situation comes up, it's no longer a panic mode, right? It's no longer a situation where someone's like, "Oh, I've never seen this one before." I think that was one of the biggest. I mean, I don't remember the exact game, but I think that happened last year in the playoffs, right? It was a situation where one team knew the roles and another team didn't.
it was the
you
Super
know
Bowl.
yeah, it was the Super
Yeah,
Bowl. Yeah.
it was
I mean, that's
overtime. Yeah.
exactly a great example of that, right? Like, you know um the more you practice, the
Mhm.
better you'll play, right?
Mhm.
And I'm a big believer in that. It's a lot of things that look and appear, even like that we see in public speaking or whatever it may be, looks like they're just rattling this stuff off for the first time, but they are not. They have huge teams behind them
Mhm.
running these scenarios. Like, well, what if this person says this? They've done their research to know how that particular reporter is going to be, right? They know what they're getting into to be able to actually show up and, answer the hard question, right?
Mhm.
And there's no reason you should assume any different. I mean, that's what we're here to do, right?
Yeah.
Is show up, practice, and makes it a heck of a lot easier for sure.
Yeah. I
Doesn't
think,
mean you're not going to get a curveball, right? I mean, but
yeah.
at
Yeah.
least you're, like you said, you depressured the situation enough that that's not going to feel,
Hmm.
you know, as
Yeah.
hard, you know.
Yeah. And I think the thing about curveballs that is interesting is that generally I feel like they show up when an interviewer is piecing together a story in their head, and that story is incomplete
Mhm.
or
Yep.
misinformed in
Yep.
some way. And so they're
Hmm.
trying to fill this gap that they've got of like, well, what I'll make an example up of, let's say someone had, an unfortunate run of events where they were at a gig for, call it 6 months, and then they were let go, and then they landed a new gig 3 months later, but they were only there for 3 months because they realized it wasn't a fit, and they sort of
Hmm.
accepted in haste, and the company that hired them didn't really know what they were looking for. And so this person's got 12-ish months of, kind of
Yeah.
unsolid ground underneath them.
Yeah. Yeah.
If an interviewer asks something to the effect of like, hey, like what happened? Like what's been
Yeah.
going
What happened
on?
here?
What
Yeah.
happened
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
The the tone in which someone answers that question, option one being like, well, and then trying to like factually walk through it. Well,
Hmm.
I was at a company
Hmm.
for 6 months, and then they had layoffs. And so I was let go. And then I was applying for a job for 3 more months. And then I landed a job, but I was unfortunately let go from there again.
Hmm.
When we start to get rattly and
Hmm.
to point to our very first point, like overly detailed,
Hmm.
the interviewer then latches on to things that are
Yeah.
quite frankly
Yes.
irrelevant. They're
Yes.
just not
You've given them the opportunity to, like you said, the permission to start piecing this together,
exactly,
and you're going to continue to build more,
totally,
just yes, like that's where
totally.
it's important to, come prepared, like know your narrative, right? Know those things, but not be able to articulate what you're trying to say in a way that like does as less of leap, it would keep opening those doors and those traps, right? That
Yeah.
someone's gonna walk through, and it's totally valid.
Yeah.
Yeah, great
And
advice.
and a much more, a
Mhm.
way that you can kind of acknowledge the question, but
Yep.
also kind of cut it off at the knees,
Yeah.
is to say something to the effect of, I thought you might ask that.
Mm.
As we all know that the last few years have been pretty topsy-turvy out there in the market.
Mhm.
I unfortunately was impacted by a few moments that were totally out of my control, and I'd be lying to say that it hasn't been difficult. It has been, but
Mhm.
I'm not giving up, and I really want to find the right
Yeah.
next thing for me because I am just itching to get back on a team and do great work and make an impact.
Yep.
And I,
Yep.
I'm so ready for that. So I'm really excited to be chatting with you today.
Yep.
That kind
Done.
of
I
it just
I have
cuts it off.
nothing else. Yeah, I have nothing else to
Yeah,
like. Well, let me poke at that. If
yeah.
anything, if I'm going to poke at anything, it's actually in my favor. I'm like, oh, well, tell me about more about like what type of team you're looking, and that opens the door to
Mm-hmm.
go into some of those conversations around like, well, yeah, this is what I'm looking. Now you go back to your know yourself plan. You go back to these things that you've already worked on, and it actually keeps that conversation, shifts it into a positive, and puts you again back in control of like how that narrative is going to go. Because
100%.
now I love it. I mean, you're hired. You're hired, Shelby.
Thanks.
Well done. No, I love it. This is great stuff.
Totally. Well, I mean,
Cool.
I think in the spirit of, keeping things tight, keeping things quick,
Hmm.
those are sort of
Yeah.
my three high levels for tough interview
Yeah.
questions. Like we said at the beginning, there's no world where we can give everyone listening an exact script of
Hmm.
what to say in any situation because everyone's
Hmm.
situation is unique. But I think
Yeah.
if people just stick to these kind of high level three things, remember, don't shy away from answering hard questions. You do want to share
Right.
directional truths.
Yeah.
Avoid going down specific detail rat holes. They're not going to help you. Save the
Yeah.
specific details for moments that you've really done well and you're in, like when you've kicked
Yeah.
ass in your career,
Yeah.
like that's when you want to
Yeah.
share the specifics of like, lay it, get as specific as you want on
Yeah.
those things.
Yep.
Second piece, definitely remember that interviews are two-way streets. You know, I
Mhm.
know that it can get exhausting out there, especially if you've been on the job hunt for a long time, but
Mhm.
when you're in those interview moments, you got to know that how you are treated in that
Yeah.
moment is a preview of how you will likely be treated once you're in that organization, and
That's
you don't deserve to be treated anything other than
mhm.
with
Correct.
respect and,
100%.
you know,
Yeah.
care and all of those things. So don't
Yeah.
don't accept less than that.
Yep.
And then third, prep and practice.
Mhm.
There's no one on planet Earth who
Mm.
conversates well, has handles
Yeah.
interviews, whatever it may be. No one does it naturally, just straight out the gate. People practice
Mhm.
this stuff. Even the
Yeah.
most talented people on planet Earth, they're
Yeah.
they're good at what
Yeah.
they do because they practice, and
Mhm. Mhm.
that's a
Yeah.
non-negotiable in this case.
Yeah. I think it's great. I love it. I think those are great three things that people can anchor towards. And as we always say, our doors, always available. If someone's like, "Hey, I've got this really interesting interview coming up. I'm nervous about X, Y, or Z," like, you know where to find us. I mean, we spend a lot of time helping folks with these things, doing interview prep and all the stuff that, giving the space for folks to have those cycles. So cool.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, Dennis, and thanks everyone listening. We will see you next week.
Thanks, Shelby. This is great.
See ya.